Chapter 21. Daniel Pilkington completed a second set of practice wizard duels and then checked the time. If his calculations were correct, he had enough time for one more set before Roland would arrive. The Gilderoy Lockhart Dueling Club was established in honor of the noted dark arts wizard fighter, author, and Hogwarts professor. He was the only one to return alive after the boy, Harry Potter, and the two other children had vanished, presumably in the Chamber of Secrets. Unfortunately, Wizard Lockhart's mind remained so muddled from the experience that no one ever learned what happened that day. Most people were convinced that only Lockhart's expert wizarding skills had enabled him to survive that fateful night at all. Daniel came to the club periodically to maintain his spell-casting scores, a necessary requirement for work. The club had numerous bewitched suits of armor holding mock wands that moved about and shot out stinging sparks at varying levels of difficulty, against which one could practice. Daniel never dueled against another wizard, unless ordered, and then he made sure he lost in a convincing fashion. He had investigated several cases of accidental wand breakage during the course of his work. Often, the non-reporting was rather good at dueling, and too experienced to let such accidents occur. That left deliberate breakage, which would have only happened by Slytherin order. Daniel liked his wand too much to risk that. Daniel finished his third set and sat at a quiet table in the corner of the main practice room. The dueling club was also a popular gathering place for wizards, mostly nons, just to socialize. Daniel fixed himself a soda and rested while watching anxiously for Roland. Despite Roland's assurances that he was okay, Daniel knew he wouldn't breathe easy until he saw Roland for himself. Bellatrix dead. And by a dog, no less. How could that be possible? More importantly, what would the Death Eaters do when they found out? What would he who must not be named do? Daniel had checked the news reports before coming to the club, and Bellatrix's name had not been mentioned. How much time did they have before her body was identified and reprisals began? Daniel longed to pass the word to tell the nons to prepare for the worst, but didn't. Ignorance was their only defense right now, and non-reaction to the news had to be genuine. Anyone familiar with Bellatrix's death before the Slytherins released the news would be immediately suspected of having been involved. Daniel had to make Roland appear just as ignorant as the rest of the population, so no one would ask him a question, the answer to which would reveal otherwise. Daniel took another sip of his soda, and then saw Roland walk through the door. He looked dirty, but otherwise unharmed. Relieved, Daniel stood and caught Roland's eye. Roland made his way swiftly to Daniel. "You look like you've fallen," said Daniel, before Roland had a chance to speak. There were huge splotches of multicolored mud on Roland's face and shirt. "Are you okay?" That was for the benefit of Slytherin spies that always lurked at the club, listening for words of discontentment and watching for illegal activities. "Yes, sir," affirmed Roland. Daniel pulled out his wand and aimed it at Roland. "Tergo," he said. Immediately the mud and gunk vanished from Roland's face and chest, but not before Daniel's shocked mind registered the huge size of the splotches. Paw prints? Roland had said there was a big dog involved, but hadn't specified how big. Daniel wondered what kind of dog could create prints that size. "If you wish to work for security, you must keep your appearance up at all times," Daniel told Roland sternly. "We have an image to keep," he added in a lecturing tone. "You need to maintain it both on and off duty." "Yes, sir," replied Roland, sounding properly contrite, but his eyes were shining, and he didn't look the least bit distressed at Daniel's scolding. They both knew Daniel's words were for the benefit of any eavesdroppers. "Time to get to work," admonished Daniel. "Have you ever been to the dueling club before?" he asked while moving to the nearest dueling station. "No, sir," replied Roland as he followed Daniel. "I think you'll find it rather different from practice at Hogwarts," explained Daniel. "Why don't you warm up with some simple dueling?" "Yes, sir," replied Roland, drawing out his wand. Daniel held out his hand to examine Roland's wand. Roland readily handed the wand to him. The wand seemed to be in good condition. "Miss," hissed Daniel as he returned the wand. Roland nodded. Daniel walked over to an armored suit. He adjusted the settings to difficult. "Ready?" he asked Roland as he stood back. Roland took his place opposite the suit. "Ready," replied Roland. He raised his wand and waited for the suit to do the same. "Expelliarmus!" Roland shouted as soon as the suit started to move. But he had spoken a fraction too soon. Roland hadn't finished aiming properly, and the spell hit the gloved wrist to the suit instead of the wand. Immediately a low buzz sounded, and the wand spit out a series of stinging sparks at Roland. Roland yelped and jumped in surprise as the sparks landed on his arm. "You'll have to do better than that if you want in security," said Daniel critically. "Again." Roland looked at Daniel before raising his wand. Daniel shook his head just a fraction. "Expelliarmus!" shouted Roland, but again his shot missed the wand, and the suit stung him. "You need to focus," Daniel urged. This time Daniel nodded slightly, and Roland's aim struck true. Immediately the wand flew out of the suit's gloved hand and clattered to the ground. "That's more like it," said Daniel approvingly, retrieving the wand and returning it to the suit. "Again." But Daniel shook his head as he spoke, and Roland again scored a near miss. Time and time again Roland shot at the suit, missing more times than not, until Daniel judged any watcher had lost count and would recognize Roland indeed needed wand practice. Then Daniel gradually nodded more and more times, permitting Roland to improve as a result of his practice. "I think you've got it now," said Daniel warmly, coming up to Roland after the wand flew again out of the suit's glove. "You need it for the entrance exam, but honestly, there's not much call for Expelliarmus out in the field. It's not like fugitives run around waving their wands. Have you ever tried Confringo?" "No, sir," replied Roland honestly. "It works like this." Daniel aimed his wand at the armored suit, twisted his wrist while flicking the wand, and shouted, "Confringo!" The suit of armor exploded into pieces that clattered on the ground. "Works better with actual people," said Daniel calmly, "but no one likes getting hit by it. Doesn't hurt," he added. "Just makes your body go all haywire and can be very embarrassing." The two stood together watching the suit magically draw itself together again, piece by piece. "Muggle security was called to a site of a double homicide this morning," Daniel whispered. "No word on their identities." Roland acknowledged with just the barest tip of his head and then said, "I can see that might be useful," referring to the Confringo spell. "Point your wand like so," Daniel added while aiming his wand at the suit, "and give it a twist with your wrist." Daniel illustrated with his own wrist and then shouted, "Confringo!" Again the suit clattered to the ground in pieces. "You ready to try?" Daniel asked as the pieces flew back together. Then, lowering his voice, swiftly said, "You remember the bag?" "Yes, sir," said Roland loudly while raising his wand. "No, sir, I forgot," he whispered in response to the second question. "Confringo!" shouted Roland, but his words had no effect on the suit. "But it's been taken care of," he added. Daniel raised an eyebrow in query as he lifted Roland's wrist to show him the proper twist. "More twist, less elbow," instructed Daniel. "Try again." Then he whispered, "How?" "Confringo!" shouted Roland, giving more twist to his wand motion. This time the suit exploded apart. "Not exactly sure, sir," replied Roland quickly before the noise of the pieces of suit landing on the ground had died away. "But he said he took care of it, and I believe him." "He?" whispered Daniel urgently. "What he?" Louder he added, "Good job. But let's see if you can repeat that." "Yes, sir," replied Roland, carefully aiming his wand again. "Confringo!" he shouted. The suit exploded a second time, and Roland quickly whispered, "He said it was the best sandwich he'd had in decades." "Decades? Who the heck?" But that could be discussed later. "Very nice," said Daniel in a normal voice, commenting on Roland's spell. "You'll need to practice it more, of course, so you can get it right every time, but I think you've had enough for today." He placed his arm on Roland's shoulder and walked him off the practice area. "Have you finished memorizing the security code?" "Not quite, sir," admitted Roland, putting his wand away. Well, I'll be testing you on the last 4 chapters tonight, so be ready. They reached the exit, and as Daniel pulled open the door, he lowered his head to Roland's ear. "Anyone asks," Daniel whispered, "you were here practicing in the morning and at home studying the rest of the day." "Yes, sir." "Come by after dinner for your test," instructed Daniel in his normal voice, sending Roland on his way. Then he hissed in Roland's ear, "And be prepared to give a full report." "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir," Roland added, looking back before he apparated. Daniel watched as Roland vanished with a loud crack. Then he closed the door to the club and returned to his seat. Daniel took a sip of his soda, stirring it with a straw thoughtfully, as he considered the scraps of information Roland had managed to relate. What had gone on at Grimold Place this morning? What about the girl, the dog, the motorbike? Who had taken care of the bag? Whomever it was, it couldn't be a Slytherin, or Roland wouldn't have trusted him. Daniel's sandwiches weren't all that great. That implied someone who hadn't eaten well in a while. A long while. Decades, Roland had said. A prisoner, perhaps? If so, who? Why? How had he escaped? What might someone like that need for help should their paths happen to cross? Daniel closed his eyes and started to make a list.